There are those who say he's unfit to be president, even dangerous. Others believe he's simply challenging the establishment and putting America first. Has the world underestimated Donald Trump? Or has he done long-lasting damage to the United States? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. This week, Donald Trump's going to mark a year in office, 12 months defined by controversy, change, and behaviour that many have questioned.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again. Sadly, the American dream is dead. But if I get elected president, I will bring it back bigger and better and stronger than ever before, and we will make America great again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe.
No, not you. Not you. Your organization's terrible. You are fake news. Any solution has to include the wall, because without the wall, it all doesn't work.
Quote, believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
Today, I am keeping another promise to the American people by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch of the United States Supreme Court.
It's inhumane, and we will not stand for it.
This is not a Muslim ban.
It's not a Muslim ban.
This is not, I repeat, not a ban on Muslims.
We're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. But it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country, and reform, but tax cut. Companies are going to be coming back, and it means really the formation of new, young, beautiful, strong companies. It means jobs, 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 jobs. The Paris deal hamstrings the United States. We don't want other leaders and other countries laughing at us anymore. The TPP would have been a tremendous disaster for our country. Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. Russia is fake news. This is fake news put out by the media. There's no collusion. There's no collusion. Absolutely no collusion. The message is really a message of peace. It's a message of coming together. Violence, bloodshed, and chaos. Radical Islamic terrorism, depraved regime. Totally destroy North Korea. Our military will soon be the strongest it has ever been. It is truly incredible to think of how much we have accomplished on our journey together. Optimism is everywhere, enthusiasm is booming, and the thrilling American adventure has never looked brighter. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to help. God bless you, and God bless America.
It has been some 12 months. Well, joining us at the round table, I'm pleased to say, we have Lanktree, a US politics reporter at Newsweek. We have Linda Yueh, broadcaster and author of The Great Economists, How Their Ideas Can Help Us Today. We have Halper-Hayes, former worldwide vice president of Republicans overseas, who made Donald Trump sit a little test a few years ago, and we'll find out what that said about him. We also have Freddy with us, deputy editor of The Spectator. Let me turn to The Economist, first of all, Linda, because you can determine how a country feels by whether people feel better off under something new. And the question is, if Americans feel better off now, and some of the figures point to it, the Federation of Small Businesses says they haven't felt as good as this for more than 30 years, is it because of Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump is benefiting from an economy that is recovering, and I think that explains a huge part of what we see in terms of the joblessness figures, unemployment. But he does also have a role in terms of giving the economy a bit of a fiscal boost. So this tax cut, tax reform package, even though it hasn't been implemented yet, what happens is people feel like they're going to get lower taxes in the future. Now, a lot of these tax cuts actually are for corporations, and those Americans who are higher incomes will benefit more. But I think the overall feeling is an economy which is recovering. The administration, I think to some people's surprise, has actually passed the tax package, and people always feel better if there's a tax cut. But probably what I ought to stress is that if you look at those who voted for him versus those who voted for his opponent, Hillary Clinton, the correlation is that those who voted for Trump thought that their own financial situation has been worse over the past few years. And for her voters, it was the opposite. So for Donald Trump to be reelected, to be well-ranked in office, he has to help average Americans feel better.
But that could be trickle-down economics in the simple sense that if people at the top get lots of money, they can create more jobs, and then the people at the bottom. We've heard that argument before.
And that hasn't actually been the case. I think that's why I was sort of stressing how the average, the median wages of America, the wages of the median person, that's what matters. And for median wages, that's been stagnant for 40 years. Now, whether or not Donald Trump can turn that around, I think that will be key to whether or not he can claim success.
You see, I'm wondering, 12 months on, how you think America has perhaps changed. Any surprises?
Well, looking at the economy, and you make a really good point about people's wages remaining low for decades, and the president's approval rating already being very low. If people don't see some of those benefits that have been claimed to be on the way coming out anytime soon, it could have an impact on whether or not they're inclined to vote for him, vote for the Republicans during the midterm elections.
Janet, let me ask you, if you had to list some of Donald Trump's achievements, rather than those that we've heard about, which could be considered, if not failures, then certainly, in some cases, faux pas, you'd put the economy in there, I'm sure you would do. What about defeating ISIS, as has been suggested, or helping to? The 60% fall in immigration, illegal crossings of the border. The judges, we've not just seen Neil Gorsuch as with the Supreme Court, but other judges, very conservative judges. He's been very active, and sometimes we don't perhaps appreciate that.
No, you don't appreciate it at all. In fact, there are 81 major achievements and 100 minor achievements. When it comes to deregulation, he has eliminated over 1,500 regulations, which has really contributed to the economy. He had said for every new regulation he would eliminate 2. It's really been 22 to 1 that's gone on there. We have GDP at 3%. They didn't predict that to happen until 2019. We have 1.7 million new jobs. We've had these companies come back in. Consumer confidence is at a 17-year high, and the stock market's going crazy. Most Republicans, if he does nothing else, the fact that he put the Supreme Court justice in is really good enough. They can live with that. But
any Republican who'd been elected would have done pretty much the same thing. They would have put in a conservative judge, wouldn't they? So that's not down to Trump.
Well, they would have put in a conservative judge, but he has also nominated 73 federal judges. And that is going to change the whole federal court system and bring it back to, I think, something that is far more moderate and reasonable, as opposed to the craziness of the Ninth Circuit, which is out on the West Coast and is known for being exceedingly liberal and having 80% of their rulings overturned.
Are we right, Freddy, or is Jan right, to sort of highlight his achievements? Have you been surprised as an outsider by how much has been achieved, whether you like it or not?
Yes, and I think the difference of perspective that a lot of Americans have with Europeans, say, on what Trump has achieved. When I've been to America, I speak to a lot of Americans outside of the Washington Beltway, who say, Trump is fixing a lot of stuff under the hood. And there's this impression, I'm not entirely convinced that they're right, but there's this impression that Trump is sort of doing stuff while nobody's looking, that is really transforming the American economy and is sort of re-energizing the engine of America. And I mean, as much as people want to dislike Donald Trump, it's good that Americans are feeling optimistic.
Well, and his approval rating doesn't really matter. I mean, people still focus on that.
It's not that bad, actually, is it?
Well, no, it isn't, and it's actually gone up 3 percentage points. But
and the difference between being liked and being unliked has actually narrowed to sort of pretty much the smallest gap since he was elected.
This last presidential election threw that out as a measurement. We had 2 of the most unlikable candidates at the same time. The measurement was, do you think the country is going in the right direction or the wrong direction? And throughout Obama's presidency, it was going in the wrong direction. Now the polls, more and more people think the country's going in the right direction, and that is the key to the measurement.
So Graham, the suggestion is that he's done much more than many people might think. Where do you think he's tripped up, other than sort of in some of the ridiculous things? And I think we can all agree that some of the ridiculous things that he's said.
Well, first of all, I'd address the fact that the president's approval rating is in the high 30s.
41% now.
Well, going into it's fluctuated quite wildly.
It has fluctuated.
It's dropped quite significantly since the beginning of the administration. And it's.
Well, I think you'd have to say that's
it has reached historic
normal, isn't it?
lows.
Because I mean, when somebody comes into office, they're obviously going to be more popular than their opponent.
Yeah,
otherwise, they wouldn't be there.
It has reached historic lows, and so depending on what he does over the next 9 months, going into the midterm elections, will really have a kind of impact. And his approval rating does give a kind of gauge for what America at large is thinking. And I would say that most Republicans
the question
a strong
to you
support
was,
for
where do you think he's made mistakes? Where do you think he's tripped up?
The president has focused on racial issues, and he's focused a lot on sending out tweets that kind of, I guess, direct the discussion or the debate within the country in a way that sows disunity, I would say. There's seems to be anger on both sides after a very contentious election, and he hasn't really done a lot to kind of smooth that over, but rather exacerbate it by focusing on things like the NFL, going after NFL players for what could be seen as a civil rights stance that they're taking.
Could some of this simply be camouflage, the actions of a man who's trying to hide other stuff?
I would say that there is definitely a tactic to it.
Sorry, and that he's brilliant at it. I mean, the NFL stuff you may have found it objectionable. But
this is the football players, American football.
The one-knee protest.
The one-knee protest. It was a brilliant distraction. And it provided 2 weeks of news. I was in America at the time, and I mean, it dominated coverage.
But let's come back specifically to this year. And Linda, if we're talking about, as was mentioned in the reporter's package there, if we're talking about trade, he's made drastic changes to America's trade position.
Yeah.
Has that improved the country's standing in the world, or has it diminished it?
I think on trade, he is not helping America's economy generally. There are specific issues that he has in terms of trade, and I think a couple of them you can argue could be fairer, for lack of a better word. I think if you look at something like the border adjustment tax, that's intended to try and essentially mimic what other countries do, which is a tax. It looks distortionary because you're promoting exports over imports, but essentially because America doesn't have a value-added tax, it is at a slight disadvantage. So there are things around the edges that could be
people
improved.
Outside the country might be worse off because of that. What about people inside?
Well, I think for Americans, if you tweak the edges of trade, It's probably somewhat fair for American corporations. But I start with that because the overall picture on trade isn't terribly promising. Trade is positively correlated with growth. And so far, President Trump has pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have created the biggest free trade area in the world. He has indicated he's going to pull out of the Korea Free Trade Agreement, and NAFTA is being renegotiated. America has 14 free trade agreements with 20 countries. It doesn't actually have a lot of them. But part of the reason is because America is quite an open economy to invest in trade in. You probably don't need FTAs, but where he's pulling out, I think, arguably, it's not great for...
But conversely, what it's done is it's brought more companies back into America. It's brought manufacturing back. And that was one of the reasons he was going for fair trade and bilateral agreements, not multilateral agreements.
Can we move on from this this particular point to something that's attached to it, which is international relations? It involves trade. And I want to ask you whether you think the president has made a fool of himself and his country and his representation overseas, most recently with that supposedly expletive deleted description of African countries.
You know, I think that what you have to look at is how he has gotten the countries in the Middle East to support the efforts to really defeat ISIS. You have to look at how the South Korean president just recently gave him worldwide recognition for the fact that North Korea and South Korea are talking. I think that when you go to these things that the liberal media likes to bring up because, you know, it's sexy or it's controversial, it takes away from actually the actions that are really accomplishing things.
So what do you think, other than North Korea and what you've just mentioned? Has he been tough on the Russians, tough enough on the Russians, or is that too close to home?
You know, I think that he sits on the fence with the Russians. I mean, he's put the sanctions in, and at the same time, he has this optimistic belief that we can turn them maybe not into an ally, but to go from an enemy to at least an occasional working partner.
Freddie, you've described him, excuse me, as mentally unusual.
Yes.
In conversations
I don't think anyone can deny that.
With our producer. Has he gone too far sometimes?
Almost certainly on Twitter. I mean, I think the idea of a tweeting president is something the whole world's having to get used to.
But that's a bit like aging rock stars, you know. I mean,
but there
weren't people who did it before.
And he says it's not presidential, it's modern day presidential.
It is.
And that he's creating a new reality in his mind. And to some extent we have to accept that he is. But on the foreign policy, it's interesting, I don't think he's tweeted once about Afghanistan. There is still this disastrous war that America's involved in, and it's going on and on and on. And that just carries on being a disaster. And that's actually a legacy from Obama and then a legacy from Bush.
A legacy from Bush. But I mean, he has put more troops in, he's committed more.
He's committed more troops, but there's no sign of any sort of resolution or actually what the end goal is in Afghanistan. But in the flashpoints, in the more sort of Twitter media explosive points, such as crushing ISIS, I think he's taken a bit too much credit for that. But
it wouldn't have happened probably without the Americans.
No, he without American support, but Obama initiated it too. So, but I mean, in North Korea, he has changed the dynamic. He has made China step up its sanctions on North Korea. He's by this sort of explosive media tactics, he's proving effective, and I think it's very dangerous in the sense that we're basically threatening nuclear war on social media. But at the moment, it does seem to be changing the dynamics in ways that other presidents have failed to do.
Bring you two back in just a moment, but we'll go to that test. You gave President Trump, he wasn't president then, but you gave him a test.
In March 2016, when he decided that he was running for president, and the media was saying he didn't have the right temperament. As a psychologist, we are born with our temperament. It is our personality that influences our behavior. So the President Temperament Assessment Tool, which had been used with 41 presidents, I had him take it. His temperament came out along with Ronald Reagan, JFK, Lyndon Baines Johnson, both of the Roosevelts, Bill Clinton. He is an action-oriented man. If you think about it, Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. He said, we're going to build a wall. He speaks in concrete terms.
Graham, tell us a little bit about what you think the dangers, perhaps, of Trump are, not just from temperament and personality, but in terms of policies.
Well, you're absolutely right that the that the president is doing things under the hood within the United States that the media and other people, policy experts may know about, but the population at large aren't really aware of. Things like at the Education Department, looking at the State Department, the reordering of that, the way that he's looking at cutting aid that the State Department delivers to maintain stability in some countries overseas. These things will, I believe, have a long-term impact on the United States. The tweets and other things sow disunity and instability right now, but those other things will change the way that the United States operates. Rolling back regulations that have been brought in to protect consumers from predatory banks and predatory lending practices. That's something that is very anti-consumer activity. Trump has attempted to influence the way that energy is delivered to the United States consumer. And he actually got pushback from his appointees who said that you cannot have this kind of influence on the market if you want it to be a free market. And the policies that he was actually proposing would cause people to have higher electricity bills.
Okay. So surprised or not surprised by what you've seen? First of all, you, Linda, in 12 months.
I'm not surprised. I think we got a good sense of Trump during the campaign, and also he's been in the public eye for a very long time. I think probably what's been slightly surprising is how much America First, which is his overall policy, has changed America's role in the international system, how it affects the rest of us. So for most of the post-war period, Second World War period, America has been a trade liberalizer. America has taken a role that's changed over time, but predictable in terms of the what it pushes, opening up markets, and NATO, for instance. I think Trump has upended that, and I think what that means...
He's an achiever, isn't he? I mean, he's managed to do an awful lot of things.
He has, and I
the
think
obvious headline things like the wall, etc., no. But I mean, in terms of working under the hood...
international.
He's also had $12 billion contributed to NATO, and they have improved by 4.3%. He said, pay your bills.
So I think what this, in terms of changing America's leadership, though, I think because he's more focused on America first, it does mean that other countries are having to step up, whether it's NATO or, for instance, China.
So
that's a very different world order.
We put this to one side. We put this to one side and say, okay, that's a lot of positives in terms of what has been achieved. You may not like some of the things that he's done, but is he barking mad and dangerous? Will the 25th Amendment be invoked?
Absolutely not. I mean, absolutely not, unless he has to commit treason, he has to commit a major crime.
Or he has to be incapable.
Well, he's definitely...
Inability is the word, but it's...
But no, it's crimes and misdemeanors. It's treason, bribery, crimes, and misdemeanors.
And incapacity.
That's impeachment.
Incapacity. He is definitely not.
Well, he is if he's judged to be...
In Section 4 and 25, he can be done on, but I think it would set an extremely dangerous precedent because the wording of the 25th Amendment is quite vague. It would set an extremely dangerous precedent if anybody was described as an unable president could then be thrown out of office.
It takes a majority of the cabinet.
It takes a majority.
Which also involves the vice president. And the vice president is not likely to turn against him. But there's been a lot of talk about it, hasn't there?
Well, that's because the Democrats cannot handle that they lost, and they can't handle the reasons that they lost. And they're still in denial, and they have had to reach, whether it's the Russian issue or the 25th Amendment. But the fact is that, yes, sometimes his behavior is rather unseemly, out of place. His tweets are very strategic. There are 4 categories: to redirect, to throw up a trial balloon, to present and frame the issue before someone else does, or to totally divert the conversation to something else. And he thinks about that. Now, would you have asked Roosevelt to get off the radio or Kennedy to get off TV? Those were the modern media of the time, and the presidents used it. He's using the modern media of the time and using it very, very effectively.
Okay, we're talking 12 months in, but are we talking about a 2-term president, Graham, or only definitely a 1-term president?
That's very difficult speculation to make at this point. I mean, I think after the midterm elections, you might see a reordering of the political scene, but you know, that's a ways away, and we still have a lot of time to go. After the first year, though, I mean, having a salacious expose book coming out at the beginning of your second year is not a good way to start that year.
You see, the Republicans also don't, by and large, like him as an establishment, do they? So the chances of him running again?
I think he'll run again. I think a lot depends on how the economy will do, because with this fiscal stimulus coming in, whether or not it will boost growth over the shorter term. And of course, American election campaigns take 18 months. So we're really, if you date back from the beginning of 2020, you're really looking at this year after the midterms is when it really gears up. And that's probably when all this fiscal stimulus is going to kick in on top of the recovering economy. And the World Bank has said world growth will peak this year, and that's led by the United States. So he's going to be campaigning at a time when the economy will be feeling much, much better.
Okay, I've got to stop it. I really have. We've been talking for too long, apparently, already. 2016, elected, 2017, inaugurated. It was a very cold January day. I was standing there watching it, and I did not expect to see quite so much of President Trump and some of his achievements in the course of the next year. 2018, we mentioned we've got the midterm elections, and they, I think, will dictate the essence of the White House in the coming 2 years. So 2020, and we have another election. Will it be Donald Trump standing once again for President of the United States? What will the world look like by then? I'm David Foss. You've been watching Roundtable. Thank you very much to all of my guests. We hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye.